At her grandson's graduation, Barbara stood to clap, until her daughter-in-law hissed, "Don't. She's not even real family." The auditorium went silent. Barbara didn't flinch. By morning, the $28,000 tuition payment her DLs had bragged about reversed. She'd smiled through their arrogance for years. Now she was done funding it. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The stadium echoed with cheers, the kind that ripple through bleachers when a name is called and a future begins. Grayson Hale's name rang out over the loudspeaker, crisp and proud. Miriam Hale stood slowly, hands poised together, pride flooding her chest like warm light. Then a whisper as sharp as a blade. "Don't clap," Julia muttered, barely turning her head. "You're not even real family." The words hit like a slap. Miriam's hands froze midair. Her palms, wrinkled and veined from 7 decades of caretaking, hung awkwardly before her chest. A beat too long, too visible. Across the aisle, Sandra tilted her head. She caught it, the motion that stopped, the muscles that stiffened, the forced stillness. Grayson had already walked across the stage, grinning with youthful pride, his robe flaring slightly with every step. He turned, searched the crowd, and found Miriam's face. He smiled. A genuine one. The kind reserved for home. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Beside her, Julia leaned forward theatrically. "We paid every cent of that tuition," she announced to the couple in front of them. "Worth every sacrifice." The woman nodded politely. Her husband offered a soft, "That's wonderful." They didn't know the truth, but Julia said it loud enough for half the row to hear. Leo, Julia's husband, barely looked up from his phone. One leg crossed over the other. He scrolled, then checked his watch. Miriam slowly lowered her hands, folding them in her lap. She said nothing. She didn't glance at Julia, didn't flinch, but her throat tightened. "Do you want a water?" Sandra asked gently, from across the seats, her eyes locked on Miriam's face. Her voice held no urgency, just code. "A check-in." Miriam nodded. "I'm fine, thank you." The crowd erupted again for the next graduate. A camera flash popped. Somewhere a cap flew in celebration, but Miriam was already drifting elsewhere. Not in memory. No, her mind wasn't wandering backward. It was calculating forward. She leaned forward slightly, watching Grayson take his seat among the graduates. He waved once more in their direction. Julia waved back with both hands, like a politician. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light. Miriam didn't wave. She didn't need to. From her purse, she pulled a small velvet pouch. Inside was a brooch, simple, understated. The same one she'd worn to his first kindergarten parent-teacher conference, to the middle school debate finals, to the college move-in day Julia hadn't even shown up for. She pinned it to her chest quietly. No one noticed, but Sandra did. "You okay?" Sandra mouthed across the aisle. Miriam nodded once. The applause surged again as the final names were read. The ceremony drew to a close, the crowd beginning to stand, chatter swelling like rising water. Julia leaned toward Leo. "We should host something. Maybe a brunch? I want people to remember this." Leo didn't respond. He was already checking for parking validation. As the crowd funneled toward the exits, Sandra maneuvered beside Miriam. "She really said that?" she whispered. Miriam gave a tight smile. She did. They walked slowly, arm in arm, letting the crowd pass around them like wind around a rock. "Want me to say something?" Sandra asked. "You know I will." Miriam shook her head. "No, she wants noise." Sandra raised a brow. "And you?" "I want facts." They paused at the stadium doors. Miriam looked out across the parking lot, where cars were already blinking to life, families piling in, balloons bouncing in the July air. She took a deep breath. "Let her have this afternoon," Miriam said quietly. Then her voice changed. "Steel beneath the velvet. She won't have the story for long." The house was silent except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Late afternoon sun streaked through the blinds in long golden slashes, landing on a folding table Miriam had set up in the middle of her living room. On it stacks, not of memories but of evidence. She moved slowly but deliberately, laying down each piece of paper with the same care she used when setting a dinner table for someone who'd never said thank you. Bank statement, check images, auto-pay confirmations from her online account, handwritten logs with notations like fall semester residence deposit and laptop bookstore receipt. The amounts added up quickly, painfully, ruthlessly. $2,100, $7,860, $12,435. By the time she pulled out the final folder, 529 plan summaries, dating back 10 years, the total sat just under $170,000. She sat back in her chair and stared at it. Not the money, the time, the labor, the years she'd spent cutting coupons and refusing to upgrade her 12-year-old Corolla so Grayson could go to college with a meal plan. On top of the ledger sat a school photo of him from 5th grade. Tooth missing. Blue polo shirt she'd ironed that morning. Julia hadn't even come to pick him up that day. Miriam didn't cry. She opened her phone and scrolled to Malik Rowan's contact. The line rang once. Malik Rowan, came the voice, crisp, efficient. It's Miriam Hale, she said. I need to update the beneficiary on Grayson's education account, and I want to file a formal statement about who paid for what. There was a pause, then calm as ever. Understood. Let's schedule time tomorrow. Before hanging up, she added, and Malik, check the marriage certificate. Julia and Leo. Dates don't match what she's been saying. I'll pull it. Click. Miriam exhaled slowly and pulled the sliding folder toward her. She reached for a fresh legal pad and began listing every semester tuition amount, payment method, date sent. When her hand began to ache, she switched to typing. 2 hours passed. Then the door creaked open. Sandra entered, holding 2 grocery bags and a bottle of iced tea. I brought snacks. And also, backup. Miriam gave a tired smile. It's not a war. Sandra raised an eyebrow at the mountain of folders. Could have fooled me. She set the bags down and stepped over to the table, scanning the documents. You weren't kidding. I kept everything, Miriam said simply. Sandra reached for one of the tuition receipts, her fingers lingering on the date. 2018. That was the year Julia missed Parents' Weekend, wasn't it? She said she had a conference. Miriam replied. She tagged herself in Miami. Sandra let out a low whistle. She's been playing real mom for 5 minutes. You were there the whole game. Miriam's gaze didn't waver. And now I'm calling the score. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a slim manila envelope, and slid out a few school forms. Emergency contact records, authorization forms. Copies of her signature again and again on every line where Julia's was blank. Sandra chuckled under her breath. You're going to bury her in paperwork. No, Miriam said, eyes focused. I'm going to exhume the truth. Her phone dinged, an email from Malik. Subject line, preliminary findings. She opened it and the screen lit up with exactly what she suspected. Julia's claims of being the sole provider didn't line up with any timeline. Her remarriage had come after the bulk of Grayson's education had already been paid. Miriam tapped her fingers once against the phone, then looked at Sandra. Tomorrow we print. I want 3 copies of everything. 3? Sandra asked, reaching for the iced tea, 1 for Malik, 1 for Grayson, and 1, Miriam's voice dipped lower, almost amused, for whoever Julia sends to do damage control. Sandra raised her glass like a toast. To facts. Miriam clinked it gently with her water. She turned back to the table, smoothing one stack of documents with both palms. Then quietly, almost to herself, she rewrote history in front of me. Sandra didn't answer. She didn't need to, but the printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out the first pages of a war Julia didn't know was coming. The smell hit first, overwhelmingly sweet, like too much vanilla extract and ambition. Miriam stepped through the front door of Julia's colonial-style home and was instantly greeted by artificial warmth and matching aprons. Take off your shoes. Someone called from the kitchen. Carpets are new. Miriam glanced down at her comfortable flats, slipped them off without a word, and stepped onto the pristine runner. The whole place looked staged. Fresh flowers, stacked catering trays, a champagne bar in the corner. Julia had gone all out. Of course she had. Sandra leaned in beside her, whispering low, "You'd think we were celebrating her degree. Or a real milestone," Miriam murmured. Grayson stood near the back patio, surrounded by guests. His smile was thin. He wore a new blazer, too stiff for him. Julia had probably picked it. His arms folded tightly across his chest, as people approached him with flutes of mimosa and over-rehearsed compliments. Such a fine young man, all thanks to his incredible mother. Julia beamed, circling like a politician on a re-election tour. "It's been a journey, but we made it. Family sacrifices, you know." Miriam didn't approach Grayson. Not yet. Instead, she wandered toward the table where a slideshow looped on a mounted screen. Childhood photos, high school honor roll shots, graduation pictures, all carefully curated. There wasn't a single image of her. Not one. Sandra leaned in again. "This brunch is giving me hives." "I didn't expect anything less," Miriam said softly, fingers brushing the edge of a napkin embossed with Class of 2025, a family triumph. Julia clinked her glass from the center of the room. "Can I have everyone's attention?" The room hushed with theatrical eagerness. "I just want to say," Julia began, placing one perfectly manicured hand over her chest, "raising Grayson has been the privilege of my life. We've worked so hard to get him here. Sacrifices were made, vacations skipped, late nights. But when you love someone like your own, it's worth every penny." Applause. Cameras. Smiles. Grayson gave her a side hug and muttered something that didn't quite reach the mic. He looked uncomfortable, his jaw tight, eyes darting. Miriam stepped forward, her coat folded neatly over her arm. She approached Grayson quietly, as the clapping faded, and slipped a small white envelope into his hand. "For you," she said gently. "Something to look at when you have time." Grayson blinked. "Is this?" Miriam smiled. "You'll see." He looked at it like it was ticking. Julia's eyes narrowed from across the room, catching the exchange. "You're leaving already?" she called with faux concern. "I've said what I came to say," Miriam replied. "Congratulations, Grayson." Grayson nodded. "Thank you, Grandma." Julia's face twitched. She stepped toward Miriam. "You didn't even stay for the cake." "I've had my fill," Miriam said with polite finality. She turned and walked past the front table, past the fake laughs and filtered camera angles, through the foyer still scented with lavender room spray. As the door closed behind her, Julia turned sharply to Grayson. "What did she give you?" Grayson looked down at the envelope. He didn't answer. He waited until she was distracted again, then ducked into the guest bathroom. The envelope was thin but firm. Inside, a one-page tuition summary, bank transfers, highlighted account numbers, a printout of 529 plan statements, a single post-it stuck to the last page in elegant, deliberate cursive. "Here's who really paid." Mere Grayson stared at it for a long moment. Outside the door, Julia's voice rose again. "He's only here because I put him first. Every step of the way." Grayson's hands tightened around the envelope. It was just past 9 when Miriam heard the knock. 3 quick taps, followed by hesitation. She opened the door to find Grayson on the porch, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, the envelope tucked under one arm. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the kind of emotional disorientation that turns confidence into sand. "Come in," Miriam said gently, stepping aside. He entered without speaking, walking slowly into the living room. The printer was still sitting on the corner table, its tray empty now. Miriam hadn't packed it away. She hadn't felt like pretending. Grayson sat down on the couch, the envelope still in his hand. "I thought she paid everything," he said finally. Miriam didn't look surprised. She made noise. He looked up. "I made payments," she added. He lowered his gaze again, staring at the carpet. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Miriam sat in the chair across from him, not defensive, not proud, just grounded. "Because I didn't have to," she said softly. Until now. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustling of leaves outside the window. Grayson pulled the envelope open again. She used to tell people she put everything aside for me, that she worked double shifts. She worked double shifts at being loud, Miriam said dryly, then softened. But you needed to believe someone was holding the wheel. I wasn't about to take that from you. Grayson shook his head slowly. I don't know what's real anymore. You do, she said. You've just never had it written down before. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a simple lease termination notice. His name was signed at the bottom. I'm moving out, he said. Julia's house. It's not home. I'll stay in the dorm guest units until I leave for grad school. Miriam didn't speak right away. Her hands folded calmly in her lap, but her throat worked once before she nodded. All right. Grayson stood, walked to her and placed the envelope down on the coffee table, not like it was returned, but like it had been resolved. I don't want to keep this, he said. But I want to remember it. Miriam's voice was low. You don't have to carry the papers, just the truth. A sudden rustling at the front door interrupted them, Sandra letting herself in with the casual familiarity only decades of friendship allow. I brought lemon bars, she announced. And also this situation is absolutely begging for a second celebration. Grayson cracked a small smile. Is that your way of inviting yourself to a party? Sandra shrugged. You graduated. That deserves more than a brunch catered by a narcissist. Miriam chuckled. What would you even call it? Sandra didn't miss a beat. The real tuition brunch. Silent sponsors only. They all laughed, but the moment shifted again as Miriam stood and walked to her desk. She opened the drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery and began to write, her pen steady, her tone professional. Grayson watched quietly. What's that? Letter to the IRS, she said without looking up. Julia filed educational claims she had no right to. I'm contesting them. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Going straight for the jugular? No, Miriam said calmly. I'm just filing the receipts. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it, and wrote the return address with a firm hand. Grayson leaned back into the couch, the weight of the past few days catching up to him. I'm sorry I didn't know, that I didn't ask. You're not the one who lied, Miriam said. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees bent slightly, whispering against the windows. Sandra cleared her throat. So lemon bars and retaliation brunch. Miriam smiled faintly. Not retaliation. She held up the sealed envelope. Just correction. Grayson looked down at the letter, then up at Miriam, and something in his eyes shifted. Not just love. Loyalty. The notary slid the last page across the mahogany desk, her gloved finger pointing to a blank signature line. Sign there, Mrs. Hale. Full legal affirmation of tuition disbursement and primary financial responsibility. Miriam's pen didn't hesitate. With one final stroke, she finished what Julia had only ever pretended to start. Malik, seated beside her, gave a small nod of approval and began collecting the pages into a secure binder. The documents were clean, deliberate, and impossible to contest. Proof of Miriam's decade-long financial guardianship over Grayson's education, notarized and time-stamped. No ambiguities left. Malik said, I'll file the revocation by end of day. The IRS won't touch Julia's deduction claims with a 10-foot pole once this is logged. Miriam leaned back slightly in her chair, her fingers relaxed but her spine perfectly straight. Make sure they receive it electronically and certified mail. Already planned for, he said. She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a different folder, her estate trust documents, updated and bound in navy leather. I want this recorded today too, she said. She's no longer a contact, not for health, finances, or anything else. Malik flipped through, his brow arched slightly at the changes. Grayson's your new proxy for all decision-making? Yes, she said simply. He deserves that authority. She never earned it. Across town, Julia sat with two friends on a sunny patio outside a boutique cafe, spinning another performance. She wore her oversized sunglasses and a new wrap dress, gesturing grandly as she laughed. You know, it's been exhausting, but so worth it. I mean, I basically gave up my career for that boy. She sighed. Leo says I should write a book. One of her friends, Claudia, nodded enthusiastically, but the other, Meredith, seemed distracted. She'd seen something. I thought your name was on the scholarship letters, Meredith said, her tone light but pointed. I saw a post from the university this morning. It only mentioned Miriam. Julia smiled tightly. Oh, that must be a mistake. She probably pulled strings. You know how older people get about their legacies. Claudia sipped her iced tea. Back in Miriam's kitchen, Sandra was scrolling through her tablet while sipping tea. So, want to see the moment her castle starts to crumble? She turned the screen toward Miriam, who leaned over and narrowed her eyes. There it was, Julia's personal blog. Archived now, but still searchable. And every gritty story about scraping together tuition was time-stamped, years after Miriam had already paid. Check the tags, Sandra said. Smug. She even used single mother triumph and debt-free grad-like buzzwords. Miriam didn't react with glee. Only precision. Print it. I want it added to the packet. That afternoon, Grayson sat cross-legged on his dorm bed, staring at his phone. A notification had popped up, a memory post Julia had reshared, a photo of his first day of college, photoshopped to show only Julia and him. Miriam had been cropped out entirely. He clicked unfollow. No hesitation. Then he opened his own social media app and uploaded something new. A candid from his graduation. In it he's walking off stage, and Miriam is in the background, mid-applause, quiet but solid. The caption read, "For the one who clapped first and never stopped." It spread faster than he expected. Comments rolled in. Classmates, former teachers, even distant cousins. That's real love. This hits hard. My grandma was the same. This post just erased every fake mommy bloggers I follow. Miriam didn't even see it until Sandra texted her with the link. I didn't know he posted this. Miriam murmured, reading the words again. Sandra leaned over her shoulder. You didn't have to. That's the point. Across her kitchen counter lay two new envelopes, sealed and ready, one to her financial advisor and another to her attorney. Her estate plan was now ironclad. That evening, Julia opened her phone to a flood of unread DMs. Wait, didn't your ML pay for the first few years? Why would you edit her out of the pics? Kind of weird to post this after your son honored someone else. She stared at the screen, then at the blinking cursor on her next blog draft. Her fingers hovered, then stopped. The cursor blinked, blinked again, and didn't move. The ballroom shimmered in soft amber light, polished to perfection like the guests' shoes and carefully rehearsed smiles. Crystal glasses clinked in steady rhythm as waitstaff moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Miriam stood near the back of the room, not out of insecurity, out of clarity. She watched, observed, waited. The evening's gala was hosted by Grayson's alma mater, honoring donors and parental figures who had supported the graduating class. Julia had ensured she was listed on the program. Guest speaker, it read under her name. Family of the graduate. On stage, Julia was mid-speech, arms wide, voice warm, a woman performing grief and resilience in equal measure. I didn't do it for the applause, she said, pausing artfully. I did it for my son. I raised him alone, through loss, through sacrifice. And now he's the man you see today. Applause scattered through the crowd. Not roaring, polite. Sandra, 2 steps behind Miriam, whispered without looking away from the stage. If she talks about pulling him out of darkness one more time, I may actually gag. She's almost finished, Miriam murmured. I hope not, Sandra replied, because I'm just getting started. From her sleek clutch, Sandra pulled out a neat stack of brochures, thick cream stock, embossed logo on the front. The Hale Endowment for Educational Integrity. Quietly, she began handing them out to the donors nearest them. No sales pitch, just a smile and a subtle nod toward Miriam. Julia had no idea. Minutes later, the dean stepped up, gently escorting Julia away from the podium with a thank you and a handshake. Her smile tightened as she made her way off stage, eyes scanning for Grayson, who wasn't there. Now, the dean announced, we also want to recognize a silent force behind our students' success. Someone who's taught us that generosity doesn't always come with volume. Murmurs. Faces turned. Miriam stepped forward. No notes, no projection, just presence. She stood with both hands resting lightly on the podium, her brooch catching a single glint of light. I didn't give speeches. I didn't host brunches. I didn't post about sacrifice, she said softly, voice steady. But I gave. I gave quietly, because some of us believe that the gift doesn't shrink just because it isn't shouted. The room hushed. She paused, then added, Grayson didn't rise alone. He rose because people stood quietly behind him and never left. It wasn't a tearjerker. It wasn't dramatic. It was real, and it landed like thunder beneath velvet. Applause swelled, not from obligation, but from recognition. As Miriam stepped down, several donors approached. A man from the endowment board shook her hand firmly. We've heard about your scholarship fund. We'd like to talk more. A retired faculty member leaned in. I remember seeing your name on the emergency contact list every semester. You were always the one we called. Julia moved through the crowd like a woman elbowing her way back into a story that no longer wanted her. She reached Miriam just as Sandra stepped between them. Excuse us, Julia hissed. I'd like a word. Miriam raised an eyebrow. With me? Don't play coy, Julia snapped under her breath. You ambushed me. You used this gala to turn people against me. Miriam looked at her calmly. You used years of my labor to build a persona. I used 5 minutes to correct it. She turned and walked away. Sandra lingered just long enough to whisper, don't trip on your own spotlight. Julia stood frozen, blinking at nothing. Back at home, Malik finalized a file on his laptop. A copy of Julia's fraudulent claims filed on behalf of Grayson was now under administrative review. A legal freeze was placed on any pending educational reimbursements or deductions tied to her name. He clicked submit, then called Miriam. It's done, he said. Good, she replied. Let the silence catch up to her. On the other end of town, Julia sat in her car, dress still sparkling under the parking lot lights. Her phone buzzed again. You didn't even mention her once. But we know now. Not a good look, Jules. She closed the screen and stared out the windshield. But this time no words came. The envelope arrived in a plain manila sleeve, unmarked except for a small return address, Grayson's University Registriar Office. Miriam opened it slowly, her fingers steady. Inside were scanned copies of documents she hadn't seen before, forms Julia had submitted years ago, claiming herself as the sole financial contributor to Grayson's education. Each one signed with an elegant, deliberate swirl. Sandra, seated across the dining table, peered over her glasses. She actually forged it. Miriam didn't answer. She turned the page. Another form. This one filed under parental contribution verification. Julia had checked every box. Tuition, books, housing, living expenses. Not a mention of Miriam. Not even once. She didn't just tell lies out loud. Sandra said quietly. She printed them. Miriam slid the papers into a folder, her lips pressed into a tight line. She picked up her phone and called Malik. I have the documents, she said without greeting. And I need to know exactly how far she pushed this. Malik responded like a surgeon called into the trauma ward. Forward them to me. I'll match them to digital timestamps and original payments. If she submitted false forms to a federal affiliated institution, we may be looking at fraud. Do it, Miriam said, voice like stone. An hour later, Malik called back, voice sharper now. They were filed under Grayson's financial aid review year. She submitted them to bolster eligibility, and later to justify Parent Plus tax deductions. But here's the kicker, she backdated the documents. She lied and manipulated the timeline, Sandra said flatly. Miriam barely blinked. What else? There's an email, Malik said. Sandra, this one might ring a bell. Dated 5 years ago. Within seconds, Sandra was typing into her ancient Gmail account, mumbling, I knew I saved it. A moment later, found it. She spun the laptop toward Miriam. The subject line was simple. Can she still pay tuition next semester? The sender, Julia Hale. The recipient, Sandra's old account. The body read, if Miriam can't cover it this fall, I'll have to take out a loan. Can you ask her without making it awkward? Miriam stared at it for a long time. The contrast was undeniable. Julia had begged for her help privately, then erased her publicly. Malik's voice came through the speaker. We can pursue charges. Forgery, filing false documentation with an educational institution. You'd have standing. I know, Miriam said, her voice almost too calm. But I want her accountable, she replied. But I want it to cost her more than a court date. She paused. Go after restitution. Every tax dollar she claimed. Every lie she sold to inflate her image. Sandra's brows lifted. That's cold. No, Miriam said. It's just long overdue. That night, Grayson posted something on the university forum, quietly but publicly. I've recently learned I was misinformed about who paid for my education. I want to thank my grandmother, Miriam Hale, for everything she sacrificed to get me here. The truth matters. He didn't tag anyone. He didn't name names. But the timing was loud enough. Within hours, Julia's social media comments lit up like brush fire. Wait, didn't you say you paid it all? Kinda shady that your son's correcting the record. Not a good look, Jules. People remember. She deleted one post, then another, then turned off commenting entirely. But the damage was done. Her brand account lost 50 followers by midnight, then 100. Then 2 sponsors quietly removed her name from their affiliates list. In Miriam's kitchen, Sandra placed a fresh stack of lemon bars on the counter. Should we celebrate? She asked. No, Miriam said, reviewing the restitution paperwork. Not yet. She flipped to the next page. There's still more she thinks she owns. The email came just after sunrise. Subject line, change in partnership status. Julia tapped it open with trembling fingers, her phone still half covered by the hotel duvet. She hadn't been able to sleep, not after the forum comments, not after the DM inbox turned radioactive. Her heart dropped halfway through the first sentence. Due to recent developments regarding your public credibility, we will be pausing all branded content collaborations effective immediately. She scrolled frantically. The parenting blog, the one that had featured her solo mom survival tips series, had quietly archived her page. Gone were the testimonials, the discount codes, the carefully manicured facade. Julia sat up. Her hand clenched the phone like it had personally betrayed her. She started typing. A rebuttal? An explanation? No. Too desperate. Instead, she opened her messages and found Grayson's contact. Julia, everything I did was for you. I was the only one left when your dad died. You think she deserves the credit now? After all this time? She hovered over send, then pressed it. It took less than 2 minutes for her screen to show message not delivered. Blocked. She stared at the screen, blinking once, then twice. In another part of Westchester, Miriam stood in front of a small conference room podium, not to speak but to listen. Around her sat 8 members of the university's Alumni Advisory Board. At the head of the table, the chairperson smiled warmly. It's our pleasure to welcome back one of our most quietly impactful members. Mrs. Hale, the committee voted unanimously to reinstate your advisory seat. Miriam accepted with a polite nod, then sat quietly as the meeting resumed. No champagne, no cameras, just recognition with teeth. Later that afternoon, she returned home to find Grayson on her porch, a worn duffel bag at his feet. His hair was damp from the rain, and his hoodie clung to his shoulders. But he looked calmer than she'd seen him in weeks. I don't want to be around her right now, he said simply. If you've got the space. Miriam didn't open the door. She stepped out onto the porch and hugged him first. "Let's get you inside." He slept on the pullout for now, but she made it feel like a room of his own, fresh towels, his favorite cereal, the mug with his middle school basketball logo still intact after all these years. By the weekend, Sandra arrived with a binder. "What's this?" Miriam asked. "Your history," Sandra said, flipping it open. "Charitable giving records. Every tutoring session, every donation, every scholarship fund you helped seed. People should know." "I don't need a resume." "No," Sandra said. "But the community does." Together they uploaded everything to the Hale Endowment site, quiet but public, transparent not performative. No begging for applause, just a ledger of a life lived in service. Meanwhile, Julia's reputation, once polished and curated, began to turn brittle. People remembered. One cousin posted an old photo with the caption, "Funny how some people call themselves solo parents when their kids' tuition came from someone else's retirement account." A former friend liked it, then another. At church, no one brought up the scholarship gala. No one asked about her blog. A woman she once shared recipes with at a PTA bake sale turned and walked away mid-aisle. It wasn't public shaming. It was quiet exclusion, the kind that hurts more because no one says it out loud. Back in Miriam's living room, Grayson sat on the couch with a blanket over his lap, watching old home videos Sandra had found in her attic. Miriam appeared in all of them, pouring orange juice, tying shoes, clapping from the stands. "Why'd you never show me these?" he asked. "I didn't think I needed to," she said. He looked at her, expression unreadable. "You didn't. But I'm glad I see it now." Outside, the sky turned from blue to soft gray, the clouds rolling in like quiet reckoning. Sandra reached for the remote. "Should I start digitizing the rest?" Miriam gave a small smile. "Start with the ones where she's cropped herself in." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "She did that?" Miriam just nodded. All that work for a story that never belonged to her. The screenshots lit up Miriam's phone just after 8 a.m. Grayson had forwarded them from an old class group thread. A GoFundMe page Julia had launched during his sophomore year, complete with a stylized banner, and a pleading description about being a single mother funding a first-gen scholar's dreams. The header read, "Help me keep my son in school. Every dollar counts." Miriam scrolled slowly. The campaign raised over $14,000. Her name wasn't mentioned once. In fact, the timeline contradicted nearly every tuition payment she'd already logged and notarized. She tapped the forward icon without hesitation and sent the images to Malik with a 3-word message, "Run the audit." He responded within minutes, "Already on it." This qualifies as misrepresentation tied to financial aid and fundraising fraud. "I'm escalating." By noon, Malik had looped in a contact at the state's Fraud Enforcement Division and filed a formal inquiry request with the IRS. That afternoon, Julia sat at her dining table, receipts and papers fanned out in front of her like a losing poker hand. She scrolled through her email inbox, past the rejection notices and sponsor withdrawals, until one subject line stopped her cold. "Notice of preliminary tax review, 529 fund discrepancy." She read it twice, then reached for her phone, but paused when she saw Leo across the room. He was quiet, too quiet, going over their joint banking app on his tablet. "Everything okay?" she asked. Leo didn't answer right away. When he finally looked up, there was no warmth in his eyes. "I've already moved my business accounts out of our shared profile," he said flatly. "I'm separating anything with my name on it." Julia's voice cracked. "You think I did something illegal?" "I think," he said evenly, "you lied to everyone but yourself. And you used my name to make it feel real." She tried to respond, but the words collapsed before they left her mouth. Leo stood, walked into the guest room, and closed the door behind him. Meanwhile, across campus, the university president's office drafted a letter on thick official stationery. Miriam received it the next morning. "Dear Mrs. Hale, on behalf of the university, I want to express our sincere gratitude for your continued support of our students. Your quiet dedication has not gone unnoticed. And your example serves as a model for what legacy truly means. Below the signature was a handwritten postscript. Your name is where it always should have been. She folded the letter and placed it in a slim gold frame on her hallway table, right beside Grayson's graduation photo. Across the room, Grayson sat at the kitchen counter, uploading a new photo to social media. It was simple, just him and Miriam in front of the porch, sunlight catching her silver hair. No filters, no hashtags, just one caption, "Real Legacy." Within minutes the comments poured in. Beautiful. This says everything. This is what truth looks like. In Julia's world, the walls tightened. A university alumni coordinator reached out not to feature her, but to confirm her name was never attached to official endowments. A tax compliance officer requested clarification on 3 years of Parent Plus loans. Her blog's homepage was now a 404 error. Her inbox, a graveyard of unsubscribes. At church the following Sunday, no one greeted her. A woman she used to bake with glanced at her, then gently turned her husband in the opposite direction. And that night, she showed up. Uninvited. Unannounced. Miriam heard the car before she saw it. Julia's leased white Range Rover pulling into the curb like a ghost begging for form. Sandra peered through the front window. She brought wine. She thinks this is salvageable. Miriam murmured. Grayson stood. You want me to get the door? Miriam shook her head, rising slowly. No, I'll do it. She walked to the door, straightened her spine, and opened it just a crack. Julia stood there, bottle in hand, smile cracked and eyes heavy with desperation. We need to talk, she said. Miriam's voice was quiet, unmoving. I'm not sure we do. Julia's mouth opened to speak, but this time the words didn't land, because Miriam didn't let her. She didn't slam the door, she just closed it. The door clicked softly as it closed, but Miriam didn't step away. She stood just behind it, hand still resting on the frame, breathing slowly. The smell of expensive wine and too sweet perfume lingered for a moment on the threshold before it was sealed out completely. But not for long. A second knock followed, not tentative, desperate. She waited a beat before opening it again, this time just wide enough to meet Julia's eyes. I'm not here to fight, Julia said quickly, breath hitching. I need to talk, please. Miriam stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut behind her, shielding Grayson from the storm brewing just outside. Julia held the wine out like a peace offering. Over supratsi to mine. I thought we could sit down. Maybe try to reset. Miriam didn't reach for it. Julia's voice softened. Look, I know things have gotten out of hand. The fundraiser, the blog, the speech. But I never meant for it to be against you. It was just easier. People understood my version. They understood your lie. Miriam replied. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, unmoved. Julia's hand dropped to her side. Please, don't escalate this. I know about the IRS. I know you're talking to people. You don't have to take it that far. I'm not taking it anywhere, Miriam said calmly. I'm just uncovering what was already there. Julia's voice cracked. You have no idea what it's like being the second wife, the outsider, always walking into someone else's legacy. Miriam's eyes hardened. And you have no idea what it was like being the first mother. The one who held his hand while he cried for a dad you kept trying to erase. Julia blinked. You rewrote me out of his life in captions and edited photos. But you never showed up when the cafeteria overdrafted, or when he needed a winter coat, his freshman year. Miriam continued. You gave him stories. I gave him stability. Julia swallowed hard. I thought we could move past this. For Grayson's sake. Miriam's face didn't soften. You keep saying that. Do it for Grayson. She leaned forward slightly. Not threatening, but devastatingly direct. I did do it for Grayson. Every check, every decision, every hour. I sat through campus security orientations alone, because you couldn't make it. I did it all for him. Then, lower. That's why I'm doing this to you. The wine bottle in Julia's hand shifted. Her grip on it was loose now, like she wasn't sure why she brought it in the first place. "I'm not the villain you think I am," she whispered. "No," Miriam said. "You're just the woman who tried to trade truth for applause." Julia opened her mouth, some new defense rising behind her eyes, but Miriam was already turning. She reached for the door, pulled it open, and glanced back only once. "I don't need you to confess, Julia. I just need you to stop performing." Then, nothing. No dramatic pause, no parting insult. Just the quiet click of the door closing for the final time. Julia stood there for several seconds, longer than she meant to. The wind tugged at the hem of her coat, but she didn't move. From inside, through the narrow space between blinds, she saw Miriam walk calmly into the kitchen, pour herself a glass of water, and sit across from Grayson, who never once looked toward the door. He hadn't even noticed she'd come. Julia stepped off the porch, wine still in hand, her heels clicking down the walkway. But for the first time in her carefully constructed life, there was no applause waiting at the end of her exit, only silence. The affidavit wasn't long. Miriam made sure of that. 4 clean pages, double-spaced, every line documented, every semester accounted for, tuition checks with bank routing numbers, bookstore receipts, dorm deposits, auto pay confirmations, each footnote linked to a notarized statement, each claim cross-referenced against institutional records. She'd spent 3 weeks assembling it with Malik's help. Sandra reviewed the final draft and said only one thing: "It reads like a eulogy for her lies." The packet was submitted by courier, hand-delivered to the county clerk's office. A second copy went to the Department of Education's fraud liaison. A third landed on Julia's attorney's desk by Tuesday. By Friday, the countersuit Julia had filed, a vague, last-ditch claim of emotional distress and reputational sabotage, was withdrawn with a single sentence: "Client no longer wishes to pursue this matter." Miriam didn't gloat. She didn't call anyone. She didn't even mention it to Grayson. But Sandra showed up that night with a bottle of wine far nicer than Julia's, and a small handwritten card that read, "Case closed." They toasted quietly in Miriam's kitchen, the dishwasher humming behind them, the air filled with that oddly weightless feeling of a door finally seeing behind you. Meanwhile, over in the fluorescent silence of the community college faculty lounge, Julia opened her adjunct email one last time. "Your contract for the upcoming semester will not be renewed. Please return your ID badge and keycard by the end of the week." No explanation, no appeal, just closure, the kind that doesn't come with punctuation. She stared at the screen, willing it to undo itself. It didn't. That night, Leo didn't come home. He texted staying with Marcus for the week. "Please don't call me." Julia didn't cry. She opened her old blog archive and stared at the blinking cursor of a draft titled "Redemption Starts at Rock Bottom." The page was empty. She couldn't type a single sentence. Back in Westchester, Miriam was finishing another document, this one deeply personal, her trust update. It now included the full establishment of the Hale Legacy Scholarship, in Grayson's name, fully funded, permanently endowed, no room for edits. "Are you sure?" Malik had asked over the phone. "I'm not writing her out of anything," Miriam replied. "I'm writing Grayson into everything." The ink had barely dried before she slipped the document into her filing cabinet. That evening, Grayson came home from a walk, earbuds tucked into his hoodie, his shoulders lighter. He found her at the kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea and flipping through an alumni magazine. He hesitated, then sat down across from her. For a moment he didn't speak. Then softly, "I'm sorry I didn't see this sooner." Miriam didn't meet his eyes right away. She just looked out the window toward the porch where Julia had stood only days ago. "You saw what you needed to," she said. "And when it mattered, you looked harder." Grayson nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "I just didn't know she could lie like that. To everyone. To me." Miriam finally turned to him. "That's the thing about liars. They're always the first to believe their own stories." He reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. "I'm here now," he said. She smiled. Not wide, but deep. They sat there for a while, the light outside dimming, the shadows growing soft and long, and upstairs on her hallway wall, beside the letter from the university president and the framed photo of Grayson's graduation, Miriam slid a new certificate into place. The trust deed, signed, sealed, real. Not just for her. Not just for him. For what came next. The rain had stopped just before dusk, leaving behind a shimmer on the sidewalks that glowed under the restaurant's antique sconces. Grayson held the door open for Miriam as she stepped into the low-lit dining room of Elbridge House, a quiet bistro tucked between two ivy-covered buildings on the university's edge. The space was intimate, but not pretentious. Exposed brick walls, flickering votives in glass holders, and the gentle hum of string jazz playing from unseen speakers overhead. Miriam paused for a moment at the threshold. It had been a long time since anyone had invited her to something where the point wasn't obligation, but genuine appreciation. Grayson gently placed a hand on her back, steering her toward the round table at the center of the room, where Dean Clarissa Yates and two members of the scholarship board stood to greet them. "You must be Mrs. Hale," the dean said warmly, extending her hand. "We've been looking forward to this evening." Miriam returned the handshake with quiet composure. "I'm not sure I've ever had a dinner thrown in my honor," she said. "Feels a little surreal." "It's not a dinner for you," the board chair said with a smile. "It's a dinner because of you." Grayson helped Miriam into her seat, then took the one beside her, subtly angling his chair so he could watch her expression throughout the evening. Sandra, already seated with a half-full glass of Cabernet, raised her eyebrows in mock ceremony. "I made them swear there'd be no speeches, only toasts, and only if they're short." Laughter moved around the table like a soft breeze, and soon menus were opened, wine was poured and the conversation flowed easily. They spoke about students who'd already applied for the Hale Legacy Scholarship, how Miriam's endowment was being structured to prioritize first-generation college applicants, and how the fund had already inspired two other donors to revise their own giving strategies. But through it all, Miriam remained still, not stiff, but cautious. She was used to giving in the dark, in silence. This was daylight. Recognition. It felt both earned and somehow foreign. When the entrees arrived, the waiter placed a simple herb-roasted chicken breast with wild rice in front of her. Miriam barely touched it at first. She was listening to the tone of the dean's gratitude, to the easy rhythm with which Grayson contributed to the conversation. He wasn't performing. He wasn't apologizing for her. He was proud. She could see it now without guessing. Near the end of the meal, Dean Yates stood and reached for a slim black folio resting beside her chair. "We promised no speeches," she said with a wry smile, "and we'll keep that promise. But we did want to give you something." She opened the folder and withdrew a framed certificate, modest but elegant, bordered in navy and embossed with gold lettering. She handed it to Miriam carefully. It read, "The Hale Legacy Scholarship, in permanent endowment at Westchester University, in honor of Miriam Hale, whose quiet generosity made futures possible." Miriam stared at it for a long moment before accepting it with both hands. There was no applause, no swelling music, just a pause, a reverent silence that held more weight than any standing ovation ever could. The room shifted gently as a university photographer approached. "Would it be all right if we captured a few shots for our archives?" he asked. Grayson nodded before Miriam could answer. Of course. 3 photos were taken. The first was formal, everyone seated together, smiling toward the camera. The second was candid, Grayson leaning in to say something that made Miriam laugh. The third was unplanned, Sandra lifting her wine glass slightly, catching Miriam's eye, and whispering something under her breath. "Clap now," she said with a smirk. "No one can stop you." Miriam looked at her for a beat, then slowly raised one hand and brought it together in a single quiet clap. It was not sarcastic, not ironic, it was full, whole, for herself. Grayson caught her expression and held it with his own. "You earned this," he said softly. "Every bit of it." She nodded, eyes shining but dry. "I didn't do it for this," she replied. "But now that it's here, I'll receive it." As the dinner wound down, plates cleared, and chairs shifted slightly back, Miriam felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not pride exactly, and not closure. Something older, something steadier. Legacy, maybe. The kind you don't have to defend anymore. And across town in a sparsely furnished rental apartment, lit only by the cold glow of a laptop screen, Julia scrolled past a university press release she hadn't been invited to contribute to. Her name was nowhere in the copy. Her inbox was empty. Her bottle of wine, untouched. The pen moved slowly across the paper, its ink dark and deliberate. Miriam's hand was steady as she signed the final page of her updated will, the legal copy resting neatly beside her estate binder. Outside, the wind stirred the oak trees in her backyard, their rustling a soft, ancient music. She didn't rush. She wanted each line, each designation to be intentional. A name struck through here, a clause revised there, entire sections rewritten, not to erase the past, but to clarify it, permanently. Julia Hale was gone from every page. No longer emergency contact, no longer alternate trustee, no longer entitled to anything tied to Miriam's estate. Instead, Miriam's educational funds, once earmarked vaguely for family needs, were now redirected entirely toward the Hale Legacy Scholarship to support future first-generation students at Westchester University. Permanent, binding, transparent, and at the top of the next page, written in clean black ink, Executor, Grayson Hale. Across the table, Malik reviewed the signed forms one last time, nodding slightly as he filed them into his leather folio. "That's everything," he said. "Filed, witnessed, recorded." Miriam gave a short nod. "Then it's finished." Malik closed his folio. Not quite. He pulled out a final envelope, thick and addressed by hand. Inside, a formal summary of a will and trust, meant for the removed party, meant for Julia. "I'll send it," Miriam said. That evening, the envelope was dropped in the blue mailbox near the library, the same one she and Grayson used to walk to when he was in elementary school. She remembered his tiny hand holding the envelope for her, proud to help with the grown-up task. It felt fitting to use it now. 3 days later, Julia sat at the kitchen table in her rental apartment, the silence louder than the city outside. When the envelope slid through the mail slot, she recognized Miriam's handwriting immediately. Her heart caught in her chest. She opened it quickly, too quickly, and read through the pages with widening eyes. Her name wasn't listed anywhere, not as beneficiary, not as emergency contact, not even as a mention in the fine print. But tucked inside, on its own separate card, was a single line in Miriam's careful handwriting. "You wanted applause. You got the echo." Julia dropped the card onto the table and pressed her hands to her face, the room spinning slightly around her. Back in Westchester, Miriam sat in her kitchen, a cup of coffee cooling between her palms. Across from her, Sandra placed 2 glasses of champagne on the table. No fanfare, no toast cards, just a quiet smile. "You did it," Sandra said simply. "All of it. On your terms." Miriam didn't answer right away. She looked toward the hallway, where Grayson's voice carried faintly from upstairs, speaking on a Zoom call with one of the scholarship coordinators. He was pitching new outreach strategies for high school applicants, completely unaware of how effortlessly he now embodied the future she'd built. Sandra raised her glass. "To your first real piece." Miriam lifted hers slowly, then clinked it against Sandra's. It wasn't revenge that filled her chest. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something sturdier. Across campus, a student-run newsletter published a feature titled "The Grandmothers Behind the Degrees," a story highlighting unsung family members who had funded college educations in silence. Miriam Hale's name was printed in the opening paragraph, not as a footnote, not as a myth, as the example. Her face appeared beside the article, smiling, proud, not posed, just real. The post went viral within the local education circuit. Universities across the state shared it. Students sent thank you texts to their own grandparents. A small-town paper even requested an interview. Miriam declined it. She didn't need a microphone. She had the legacy. And this time, no one else could claim it. The podcast episode dropped on a Thursday morning under the title Invisible Inheritance: The Grandmothers Who Paid. The host, a young journalist from a regional NPR affiliate, had interviewed Miriam weeks earlier in a quiet studio just outside town. No video, no makeup, just voice, just truth. At first it circulated modestly: educators, parent groups, small-town Facebook shares. But by lunchtime, it had taken root in places Miriam never imagined: Reddit threads, teacher forums, Instagram reels. People weren't just listening, they were tagging their own grandmothers. They were weeping. One caller left a voicemail on the show's comment line. "My Nana sold her Buick so I could pay for books. This story made me call her for the first time in months. Thank you." Another wrote in, "My grandmother was the backbone of my college years. I just never said it. I will now." By Friday, the episode had been replayed over 500,000 times. Miriam didn't track the numbers. Sandra did. She texted hourly updates that Miriam mostly ignored until Sandra finally appeared in person with a tablet in hand and a look of stunned amusement. "You're a headline now," she said, waving the screen like a fan. "Do you want to know how many grandmothers emailed the podcast asking to send in their own stories?" Miriam looked up from her crossword puzzle, brow arched. "Do I?" 387, Sandra said. As of this morning. Miriam set her pen down. For a moment she said nothing. Then quietly, "Maybe it wasn't just me." Sandra smiled. "It never was." That weekend, Grayson published a personal essay on Medium. The title read, "Everything My Grandmother Paid For and Everything I Almost Missed." It began simply, with a scene: his first night in the dorm, opening a care package with a tiny jar of jam, a Target gift card, and a post-it that read, "Proud of you, Mir-e." Then it expanded, line by line, receipt by receipt, into a vivid ledger of the invisible costs of success. The emotional ones, the financial ones, the ones buried in silence. The post spread faster than he expected, not because of the name, but because it resonated. It felt like truth finally making its way through years of noise. Meanwhile, in the small rental apartment where Julia now lived alone, she scrolled past the article, recognized herself in the absence, and quietly deleted every old graduation post, every cropped photo, every hashtag that had once been a badge of performative motherhood. She deleted them not because she was ashamed, but because they no longer belonged to her. On Monday, Miriam stepped onto a stage at the statewide Forum for Educational Equity. It was held in a mid-size civic center. Nothing fancy: folding chairs, vinyl banners, half-full coffee urns, but it was packed. Her name was printed on the program beside a bold title: "Community Donors Who Changed the Game." She wasn't nervous. She was something else: present. The moderator leaned toward her microphone. "Mrs. Hale, when did you first realize that your contributions weren't being credited?" Miriam paused, looked out at the room, and saw Sandra seated in the front row, arms crossed, lips curved in an encouraging half-smile. "I don't know if I ever thought about it that way," Miriam said slowly. "I knew what I gave. I knew who it was for. I just didn't think anyone else needed to know. And now?" Miriam took a breath. "Now I think silence is a kind of burden, and recognition isn't vanity, it's record-keeping." The audience murmured, nodding. Later that evening, after the session ended, and the panelists exchanged polite thank yous, Miriam stepped down from the riser, her heels clicking softly on the old auditorium tile. Sandra met her halfway, holding out a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in brown paper. "You did good," she said. "I just told the truth." Sandra laughed once, quiet but full. "Yeah." And for once no one tried to take the credit. The lights dimmed behind them as the auditorium emptied out, but neither of them moved just yet. Outside, the sky was turning rose gold, and somewhere out there women were listening, and remembering, and making sure they were never edited out again. The campus at Ashton University was wide and sun-swept, its stone buildings casting long honeyed shadows across the main quad. Orientation day buzzed with a soft, nervous energy, students in crisp lanyards clutching tote bags, parents scanning schedules, administrators herding newcomers toward breakout sessions. Grayson walked slowly alongside Miriam, the canvas of his ID badge swinging lightly from his neck. He wore a simple blue button-down, and a look of cautious anticipation. Miriam, beside him, kept her steps even, her eyes taking in the ivy-wrapped dormitories and the way the students glanced at their surroundings like they were stepping into something just slightly too big for them. They passed under an archway bearing the university's motto, when a woman in a university polo called out, "Grayson Hale." He turned. "Yes?" The woman's smile widened. "And this must be Miriam Hale," she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. "I'm Kara Lyman from the advancement office. I just wanted to say how honored we are to welcome the both of you today. You're kind of a legend around here now." Miriam blinked, unsure how to respond. Legend was never a word she'd considered for herself. Kara continued, already gesturing toward the far end of the courtyard, where a small banner fluttered beside a check-in table. "The Hale Legacy Graduate Fellowship, advancing first-gen scholars." Beneath it, 3 students stood beside a folding table stacked with forms, each one wearing the fellowship's navy sash. As they approached, one of the students' tall glasses, visibly nervous, looked up and did a small double take. "You're her," she said. "I mean, you're Mrs. Hale." Miriam gave a polite nod. "I suppose I am. I just wanted to say thank you," the student said. "I didn't think I could afford this program. Not really, but I got the fellowship. I didn't know people like you even existed." "You'd be surprised how many do," Miriam said gently. "We've just been quiet." More students gathered around. Not many, maybe 6, but enough to draw a small pause in the stream of orientation traffic. One by one, they offered handshakes, thank yous, brief stories of where they'd come from. Small towns, big dreams, parents who never finished school. Grayson stood to the side, watching it all, his posture straightened as he turned to one of the curious parents nearby. "She's the reason I'm here," he said. "Not the one who yelled the loudest. The one who paid the bills and never asked for applause." Later that evening, after the orientation had settled and the new fellows dispersed, Miriam walked through the university's alumni atrium, her steps echoing against the polished stone floor. On the far wall, a new plaque had been installed. It bore her name, not large, not gaudy, but clear. Etched beside it were the words "Quiet Foundation, Enduring Reach." She didn't linger. Back home, the house was still and warm. On the mantel above the fireplace, the framed letter from the university president sat centered between 2 candles. Grayson had added a second frame beside it. Inside was a single line written in his handwriting: "You were the legacy. Always." Miriam stood there for a while, eyes on the ink. Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame as Sandra appeared behind her, already slipping out of her heels, and tossing her bag onto the armchair. "Told you your receipts would speak louder," Sandra said. "They weren't supposed to speak at all," Miriam replied, the words soft and thoughtful. "But I guess even silence has a voice when someone listens." Sandra walked to the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water and raising it slightly toward the fireplace. "Then here's to every check, every email, every overdrafted December, every damn time you chose him over recognition." Miriam didn't toast. She didn't need to. Because that evening, in quiet corners of dorm rooms, in kitchen tables across the state, and inside the hearts of students whose lives she would never fully know, her name meant something. Not because she demanded it. Because she earned it. They clapped for each other. But the applause that mattered started with me.